the birth of the Pontiac GTO, the godfather of muscle cars. Close your eyes and imagine it's the early 1960s in America. The world feels full of energy, possibility, and restless youth. Rock and roll is on the radio, highways are stretching farther than ever, and Detroit is the beating heart of the American car industry. Pontiac, a division of General Motors, was not known for being the wild one in the family. The brand was respected, certainly, but it wasn't the car that teenagers dreamed of or that racers bragged about. That was about to change. The story of the GTO begins with a man named John DeLorean. Yes, the same DeLorean who would later create the stainless steel car made famous in Back to the Future. But before all of that, DeLorean was an ambitious, imaginative engineer at Pontiac. He was clever, charming, and unafraid to bend the rules. At the time, General Motors had an internal policy that limited the size of engines in its smaller cars. The idea was to keep insurance costs lower and to avoid encouraging reckless driving. But DeLorean saw things differently. He knew there was a new generation of drivers coming of age, young people who wanted speed, style, and attitude. He had an idea. What if you took a modest, mid-size car and gave it the biggest engine you could possibly fit inside? That car would be light, quick, and powerful. It wouldn't just be transportation, it would be an experience. So in 1963, DeLorean and his team quietly slipped a 389 cubic inch V8 engine into a Pontiac Tempest, a mid-size model. The transformation was dramatic. Suddenly, this ordinary car became something entirely new, something that felt alive, muscular, and defiant. To make it official, they gave it a name, GTO. Those three letters were borrowed from Ferrari's legendary 50 GTO, which stood for Gran Turismo Omologato. In Italian racing circles, it meant a car homologated for Grand Touring competition. For Pontiac, though, the letters were more about attitude than accuracy. They lent a sense of European prestige to an American powerhouse. When the Pontiac GTO debuted in 1964, it wasn't just a new model, it was the birth of a movement. Suddenly, here was a car that wasn't afraid to boast about its horsepower, its throaty exhaust note, and its ability to leave tire marks on suburban streets. The GTO appealed directly to America's youth. For just a few $100s more than the price of an ordinary Tempest, you could buy a car that looked meaner, sounded angrier, and accelerated like nothing else in its class. It was rebellious, yet accessible, loud, yet stylish. Magazines of the day took notice. Car and Driver famously pitted the GTO against a Ferrari in a tongue-in-cheek comparison. And while the Pontiac didn't quite match the Italian exotic on the track, it proved that muscle didn't have to mean high prices. Power could belong to the people. The Pontiac GTO quickly became a cultural phenomenon. Sales exploded, and competitors scrambled to catch up. Chevrolet, Ford, Dodge, and Plymouth all began producing their own muscle cars in response. What DeLorean and his team had created was not just a new model, it was the spark that lit the fuse of the entire muscle car era. By the late 1960s, the GTO was everywhere. In songs, on posters, roaring down main streets, and dominating drag strips. Young people bought them, admired them, and dreamed of them. For many, the GTO wasn't just a car. It was freedom, independence, and identity, a machine that captured the spirit of a generation. The Pontiac GTO would go on to evolve throughout the 1960s and 70s, but its first appearance in 1964 is remembered as the exact moment when the muscle car era officially began. That's why enthusiasts still call it the godfather of muscle cars. And it all started with a rebellious idea, a clever engineer named John DeLorean, and three simple letters, GTO. The Ford Mustang and the rise of the pony car picture America in the spring of 1964. The country is optimistic, youthful, and moving fast. The post-war boom has given rise to new suburbs, new highways, and a generation of young people who see cars not just as transportation, but as a reflection of who they are. Into this world came one of the most iconic automobiles ever created, the Ford Mustang. The Mustang wasn't born in the boardrooms of Detroit executives. Instead, it was the vision of a man named Lee Iacocca, a marketing genius at Ford. He understood something that the industry was overlooking. America's youth wanted cars that were stylish, affordable, and fun to drive. They didn't want their father's bulky sedans. They wanted something sleek, something personal, something that felt like freedom. The Mustang was Ford's answer. Introduced at the 1964 New York World's Fair, the car instantly captured the nation's imagination. It had long, flowing lines, a low stance, and a galloping horse badge on the grille that would soon become legendary. It looked fast, even when standing still. But what made the Mustang truly revolutionary wasn't just its design, it was its accessibility. Unlike expensive European sports cars, the Mustang was priced within reach of ordinary Americans. For just over $2,300, you could buy one brand new, and it was highly customizable. Ford offered a variety of engines, trims, and options, allowing buyers to make the car their own. You could have a practical six-cylinder coupe or a roaring V8 fastback built for the open road. The Mustang was marketed not as a car, but as a lifestyle. Advertisements showed young men and women cruising along coastal highways, parking at the beach, or heading out on adventures. It was freedom on four wheels, and the strategy worked spectacularly. On its very first day, the Mustang sold over 22,000 units. Within a year, Ford had sold more than 400,000. No car had ever taken off so quickly. By 1966, over 1 million Mustangs were on the road. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural tidal wave. The Mustang's success also sparked something bigger, the rise of what came to be called the pony car. The term was coined by journalists to describe the wave of small, sporty, affordable coupes inspired by the Mustang. Soon, competitors rushed into the market. Chevrolet introduced the Camaro. Pontiac offered the Firebird. Dodge rolled out the Challenger. Even AMC brought forth the Javelin. The formula was simple but irresistible. Sleek styling, affordable price, and enough performance to thrill a generation that lived for speed. These cars were smaller and lighter than full-size muscle cars like the GTO, but they carried the same attitude. They were fast, flashy, and designed to capture attention. And the Mustang itself quickly proved it wasn't just about looks. In 1965, Ford introduced the Shelby GT350, a collaboration with racing legend Carroll Shelby. Suddenly, the Mustang wasn't just a stylish cruiser, it was a serious performer on the track. From there, high-performance models like the Boss 302 and Mach 1 cemented the Mustang's reputation as a true performance icon. The Mustang became more than a car. It was a symbol of youth, individuality, and the American dream of endless open roads. Songs were written about it. Movies featured it in chase scenes, none more famous than Steve McQueen's Bullet, with its green Mustang fastback roaring through the streets of San Francisco. By creating the Mustang, Ford didn't just launch a best-selling model. They created an entire new class of car, the pony car, that defined an era and changed the industry forever. Today, the Mustang's legacy lives on. It remains in production after 6 decades, evolving with the times, but always carrying the same spirit of freedom and rebellion that made it an instant legend back in 1964. The rise of the Mustang showed the world that cars could be more than machines. They could be icons, companions, and dreams made real. And in doing so, it secured its place as one of the most important cars in history. The Dodge Charger, from NASCAR to Hollywood. If the Pontiac GTO was the car that sparked the muscle car era, and the Ford Mustang was the youthful rebel that gave rise to the pony car, then the Dodge Charger was the brawler, big, powerful, and built to dominate both the racetrack and the silver screen. The Charger first appeared in 1966, born out of Dodge's desire to compete in the rapidly growing market for performance cars. Unlike the smaller, sporty Mustangs and Camaros, the Charger was built on Dodge's full-size platform. It was longer, wider, and carried a more aggressive stance. With its fastback roofline, hidden headlights, and wide grille, the Charger looked like nothing else on the road. It was bold, and it demanded attention. Under the hood, Dodge offered an array of engines, but the star of the lineup was the legendary 426 Hemi V8. Known simply as the Elephant because of its sheer size and power, the Hemi turned the Charger into a fearsome machine. On the street, it made the car one of the quickest around. But it was on the racetrack, especially in NASCAR, where the Charger truly made its mark. In the late 1960s, Dodge realized that aerodynamics were becoming just as important as raw horsepower in racing. That led to the creation of the 1969 Charger Daytona. With its pointed nose cone and towering rear wing, the Daytona looked outrageous compared to any other car of its time. But it wasn't built for style. It was built to slice through the air at speeds that left competitors in the dust. The Charger Daytona became the first NASCAR vehicle to break 200 miles per hour, a feat that stunned the racing world. Its dominance, along with the Plymouth Superbird that followed, was so overwhelming that NASCAR quickly changed the rules, effectively banning cars with such radical aerodynamic designs. The Charger had pushed the limits of racing so far that the rulebook itself had to be rewritten. But the Charger's story didn't end on the track. In the 1970s, it found a second life in Hollywood. Perhaps the most famous Charger of all was a black 1968 model featured in the movie Bullitt, where it faced off against Steve McQueen's Mustang in one of the most legendary car chase scenes ever filmed. The Charger's menacing look and growling exhaust note turned it into the perfect villain's car, sleek, dark, and powerful. Not long after, the Charger appeared again, this time in a much lighter role, as the bright orange General Lee in the TV show The Dukes of Hazzard. With its Confederate flag roof, horn that played Dixie, and seemingly endless supply of stunt jumps, the General Lee became one of the most recognizable cars in television history. For many Americans, the Charger wasn't just a car, it was a household name. The Charger's dual identity, as both a race-winning powerhouse and a Hollywood star, helped cement its place in automotive history. It represented speed, danger, and excitement on the racetrack, but also charisma, fun, and pop culture cool on the screen. Though muscle cars faded during the fuel crises of the 1970s, the Charger's nameplate endured. Decades later, it returned as a modern performance sedan, carrying echoes of its heritage. And in the Fast and Furious franchise, Vin Diesel's character, Dominic Toretto, made the Charger an icon once again, driving a supercharged version that roared with the same attitude as its ancestors. From NASCAR dominance to silver screen fame, the Dodge Charger became more than just another muscle car. It became a symbol of power, rebellion, and drama, a machine that could capture the imagination, whether it was thundering around a racetrack, leaping across a county road, or tearing through a Hollywood chase scene. The Charger showed that cars could be both competitors and characters, blurring the line between machine and myth. And that's why, even today, the name Charger carries a weight that few others can match. The Plymouth Roadrunner, speed made affordable. By the late 1960s, muscle cars were everywhere. But as car makers chased more power and more luxury, something began to happen. Prices went up. What had started as inexpensive fun for young drivers was quickly becoming out of reach. Bigger engines, plusher interiors, and rising insurance costs meant that many teenagers and working-class enthusiasts could no longer afford the thrill of muscle car performance. That's when Plymouth decided to do something different. In 1968, they stripped everything unnecessary out of a car, added a big engine, and gave it a name that would make people smile: the Roadrunner. The Roadrunner was based on Plymouth's midsize Belvedere, but with a twist. Instead of chrome trim, fancy bucket seats, or flashy options, it came with vinyl bench seating, plain door panels, and minimal extras. But under the hood, buyers could choose from Plymouth's most powerful V8s, starting with a 383 cubic inch engine and going all the way up to the legendary 426 Hemi. It was fast, it was loud, and most importantly, it was cheap. The Roadrunner's price started under $3,000, making it accessible to a whole new group of drivers who wanted nothing but pure performance. It wasn't a car for showing off at country clubs. It was a car built to win at stoplights, drag strips, and Friday night cruising. And then there was the name. Plymouth licensed the character Roadrunner from Warner Bros. Cartoons, complete with a beep-beep horn that mimicked the cartoon's famous sound. At first, many executives thought the idea was silly, but when customers saw it, they loved it. The playful branding made the car instantly recognizable, and the connection to speed and fun fit perfectly with the muscle car spirit. On the road, the Roadrunner lived up to its promise. With big engines and lightweight construction, it could easily keep up with more expensive cars like the GTO or the Mustang. In fact, a Roadrunner equipped with the Hemi was one of the quickest muscle cars of its time, capable of quarter-mile runs that left more expensive cars in the dust. The formula worked. In its first year alone, Plymouth sold nearly 45,000 Roadrunners, far more than they expected. By 1969, sales had doubled, making it one of the most successful muscle cars in the entire Chrysler lineup. The Roadrunner's popularity also pushed competitors to rethink their strategies. Chevrolet introduced the Chevy Nova SS, Ford had the Torino Cobra, and Dodge, Plymouth's own sibling brand, offered the Dodge Super B. Suddenly, budget-friendly muscle became its own category. But what made the Roadrunner truly special was its balance of personality and power. The cartoon tie-in, the stripped-down design, the rumbling exhaust, all of it gave the car an attitude that young buyers loved. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a statement. Of course, the good times didn't last forever. As the 1970s brought rising insurance rates, stricter emissions rules, and the fuel crisis, even the Roadrunner couldn't escape the muscle car decline. The big engines shrank, horsepower ratings dropped, and by the mid-1970s, the car was a shadow of its former self. Yet the legacy of the Plymouth Roadrunner lives on. Collectors today prize the early models, especially the Hemi-powered versions, which are now worth far more than their humble original price. And even for those who can't own one, the Roadrunner remains a symbol of muscle cars at their purest, stripped down, no nonsense, and built for speed. The Roadrunner proved that you didn't need luxury or status to enjoy the thrill of American horsepower. Sometimes, all you needed was a big V8, a cartoon bird, and a little bit of attitude. The Chevrolet Camaro versus the Ford Mustang Rivalry. In the mid-1960s, the American auto industry was at its peak. Every manufacturer was chasing new ideas, new buyers, and new ways to stand out. But no rivalry captured the imagination of car enthusiasts quite like the battle between the Ford Mustang and the Chevrolet Camaro. It all began in April of 1964, when Ford introduced a car that would change the market forever, the Mustang. Sleek, sporty, and affordable, the Mustang wasn't quite a muscle car in the traditional sense. It didn't need the biggest engines or the most power. Instead, it was designed to look fast, feel exciting, and appeal to younger buyers. With its long hood, short deck styling, and endless customization options, the Mustang was something new, a pony car. The response was immediate. In its first year, Ford sold over 400,000 Mustangs, smashing expectations. By 1966, more than 1 million had already been built. The car wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. Young drivers loved it, families bought them as second cars, celebrities drove them, and soon the Mustang was everywhere. But in Detroit, success never goes unanswered. Across town at General Motors, Chevrolet couldn't just sit by while Ford created a whole new category of car. GM executives wanted a direct competitor, something that could challenge the Mustang on price, style, and performance. The result, in 1966, was the birth of the Chevrolet Camaro. Chevy positioned the Camaro as a small car with big car performance. Like the Mustang, it had a wide range of trims and options. Buyers could choose everything from an economical 6-cylinder model to the fire-breathing SS and Z28 versions. The Camaro was marketed as versatile, stylish, and perhaps most importantly, a little bit tougher and meaner than the Mustang. The rivalry quickly spilled onto the racetrack. Ford entered the Mustang in the SCCA Trans Am series, where Carroll Shelby tuned special versions to compete. Not to be outdone, Chevrolet fielded the Camaro Z28, designed specifically for racing. Throughout the late 1960s, the two battled for dominance on road courses, with drivers like Mark Donohue bringing Camaro victories that cemented its reputation. On the streets, the rivalry was just as fierce. Young drivers debated endlessly, Mustang or Camaro. Ford loyalists loved the Mustang's head start and sleek styling, while Chevy fans praised the Camaro's handling and muscle. Both cars had nearly endless aftermarket support, making them favorites for drag racing, customization, and cruising culture. Pop culture also fueled the competition. The Mustang had its star-making turn in the 1968 film Bullitt, with Steve McQueen's Highland Green Mustang GT roaring through the streets of San Francisco in one of cinema's greatest car chases. The Camaro, meanwhile, developed its own identity as the underdog, beloved by grassroots racers and hot rodders who preferred Chevrolet's big V8s. As the 1970s arrived, the rivalry entered a new phase. The 1970 Mustang Boss 302 and the Camaro Z28 represented the peak of the pony car wars. But soon, outside forces began to reshape the market. Rising insurance costs, stricter emissions rules, and the fuel crisis all conspired to cut horsepower and change buyer priorities. Yet even as the golden age of muscle began to fade, the Mustang and Camaro rivalry endured. Through the malaise of the 1970s, the boxy redesigns of the 1980s, and the retro revivals of the 2000s, both cars stayed locked in competition. When one innovated, the other answered. When one stumbled, the other surged ahead. Today, the Mustang and Camaro rivalry remains one of the most iconic in automotive history. The Mustang has continued production without interruption since 1964, a symbol of Ford's commitment to the pony car formula. The Camaro, on the other hand, has had pauses in production, but each time it returned, it brought fresh energy to the battle. From the fourth-generation Camaro of the 1990s to the modern SS and ZL1 models that pushed performance into supercar territory. In the end, the rivalry between the Mustang and Camaro is about more than just cars. It's about identity. It's about Ford versus Chevrolet, East versus West, style versus substance. For nearly 6 decades, these two cars have captured the imagination of enthusiasts, not just for what they are, but for what they represent. A competition that pushed both brands to be better, faster, and more exciting. And for many, choosing between them isn't about horsepower or lap times. It's about loyalty, heritage, and passion. Mustang or Camaro, there's no wrong answer, only the one that speaks to your heart.